Okay, lecture module 9. Yesterday we stopped off at this point in the textbook material. Now recall, yesterday I presented one of the models that organized crime uses to collect funds, essentially collect dues throughout its network so it can pay for very good computer scientists to hack. When we speak about sabotage, I want to present another model that they use in their attacks. Um, Many of their attacks are not directed. It's not as if organized crime is sitting there looking at a specific organization to hack. They do a lot of their work, their research up front, a lot through social engineering. They maintain databases. They maintain databases of the systems that an organization will use. And this has actually been made easier through the use and the widespread use of open source software. So we know with open source software, an organization can't go to, say, Microsoft and say, hey, we're having a problem. They have to put it out to the community. And this is done on bulletin boards and forums. So a system administrator may write, hello, I'm having problems with my Apache web server. I run an AIX system, IBM or something of the like. So organized crime, of course, is monitoring this. And they'll maintain a database. Here's the organization. Here are the systems they have in use. And why do they do this? Well, we know about patches, right? With our phones or devices, we get patches repeatedly, continually, to shore up vulnerabilities. They're security patches, which means the manufacturer, whether it's Apple and iPhone or Android, Google, or Samsung, have identified a vulnerability. So when one of these companies releases a patch, that patch will actually indicate, or can indicate through reverse engineering, what the hole was, what the vulnerability was. So if you look at a system, a patch comes out, who knows when it comes out, maybe at midnight. Does the organization have people there on duty to apply that patch? What if the patch comes out during the day, during normal business hours, working hours? Are they going to stop their business and apply the patch, or will they wait until midnight at night? What this does is it gives organized crime a very small window. So the patch comes out, they put their programmers on it. What are they trying to shore up? What are they trying to resolve or fix? What vulnerability is there? And if they can determine that, then they go to their database. They say, okay, what organizations are running this system that was just patched? And now I can try or present my attack vector and try to break in. Because if that organization has not applied that patch yet, they've identified where the hole is, you can get right in. Now, likely, the hackers are not going to do anything right then. They'll leave a backdoor. They'll leave a user account with administrative privileges, something of the nature. They'll do something like this because they're probably going to want to do even more research. But what this really compels or communicates is that we need to be very aware of what we type in our social network posts. I'll talk more about this down the road. Is there a way around it with open source software? Maybe, maybe not. So looking at computer sabotage, here's where we begin speaking about viruses, worms, trojans, bots, etc. Or what they're doing out there with sabotage is they will sabotage websites, or they could just sabotage corporate infrastructure, maybe wipe out data just to be a nuisance, or to create a denial of service type situation. So botnets, what are botnets? A bot is a controlled computer. So this computer now has, malicious code on it, and it can be controlled by, the bot herder. Quite often, these are used to spread worms. They're used to create denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service attacks. At one point in the early 2000s, they found that over 50% of government computers had bots on them, or they were bot controlled. That's been resolved. And unfortunately, that was so long ago. That was before I started creating CISS100.com. So I didn't have a chance to bookmark that and include that into the CISS100.com content. Denial of service attacks. They can happen just because the nature of the world, or it can actually be an attack. As an example of it just occurring, for lack of a better word, in nature, if you look at whenever Apple launches a new iPhone, okay, their servers are just hit so hard that quite often they go offline, denial of service. And recall from the Department of Defense information assurance definition, availability is number one. So if you can take away the availability of information, obviously you can cause some damage there. Other times, it will actually be an attack vector. And as I just mentioned, quite often by botnets. If you have a large distributed botnet that I can control, if I can all have them, essentially ping or hit a server at the same point in time, it may be possible to bring down that web server. A lot of this too, we look at going back to the availability and the denial of service. What can be compromised there? Okay, you're taking a server down, you're preventing them from doing business, but trust, okay? You may negatively affect that trust in that organization. And for a competitor, that's very real. And we're actually going to look at this when we get to the deep and dark web, because there are actually services out there. You can actually contract for this on the deep web. Malware. Okay, so bots are a type of malware. But of course, we have viruses, we have worms, Trojan horses. So note that malware can affect or impact immediately, or it could be triggered to occur at a later time. So we have logic bombs triggered when a certain condition is met. So essentially event-based, or time bombs that are triggered by a particular date and time. Viruses and worms. Okay, so the textbook doesn't state this. So again, this is beyond the scope of this course, but it's actually the correct definition of a virus. Viruses attach to files, much like a biological virus. What does a biological virus do? It attaches to a cell. Computer viruses attach to files. So of course you can get them through email, an email attachment. You can contract a virus if you download a file. That file may have an attached virus. And viruses can be very pernicious. They can change their form. They can be polymorphic. So they're very difficult to attack, or excuse me, to identify. And we'll look at that in just a minute. In contrast, a worm finds its own way in through open IP addresses with open ports, okay? So worms have to be caught at the TCP layer by firewalls. The textbook states incorrectly. Now, again, you're responsible for the textbook material. I stated that day one. We'll treat the textbook as absolutely correct. However, worms are not typically sent as an email attachment, okay? Viruses attach to files. Worms find their own way in, okay? Trojan horses. Well, we know the story of the Trojan horse, the original Trojan horse. It appeared to be a gift, but of course it was laden. It had soldiers essentially in its belly. The same concept works here, where the Trojan horse appears to be doing one thing and then will do something else that is negative. Quite often, these are they'll capture keystrokes and then send them off. So you may be using a program that you think is doing one thing, when in the background it's actually capturing all your usernames and passwords and the like and sending them off. Mobile malware is increasing. Yesterday, I presented a contrast in why Microsoft Windows may be hacked more than, say, Mac. And there's several factors there, if you recall. One, there are more implementations of Microsoft Windows. So it's a bigger target, okay? Again, what do you want to do? You want to cast a wide net. But also, Macintosh had a monolithic kernel. Everything was wrapped into that single kernel. Whereas Windows, you had separate memory managers, storage manager, scheduler, all of these things. Essentially, again, I gave the analogy of a house with many windows and doors being Windows, and a house with one window and one door being Mac, okay? So that homogeneous Mac versus heterogeneous Windows perspective. But let's recall also what we learned in architecture and hardware. Recall that hardware stack, right? Because I now need device drivers that sit between the operating system and the hardware. And really what I'm talking about here is peripherals, but hard drives also fall into that as well. And who writes these device drivers? It's the company that makes the device. And quite often, these companies are trying to get their product to market quickly. So they get the product done, and then, of course, they have to write the device driver. Well, think about your phone. Think about how many updates you get that are essentially security patches. Because when we write code, humans, no matter what we create, it will have a vulnerability. Over time, we'll identify it and hopefully patch it. So we know how many updates we get on our phones, but how many updates do we get for our device drivers? How many of you have ever updated your device drivers? We used to do it all the time. Back in the 90s to 2000s. I'm on Mac now, so it's pretty homogeneous, so I don't have to do that. And Mac actually includes them in their updates. Okay, so again, Windows, because of these device drivers that may have vulnerabilities, which of course are acting in protected mode. We know what that is from this chapter on operating systems, and thus have system administrative type privileges. But talking about the homogeneous versus heterogeneous approach, it actually goes the other way when we look at the mobile phones. Because Apple, of course, you have a single, essentially, iOS version that's used on iPhone 6, iPhone 7, iPhone 8, and I don't know if iPhone 6 and iPhone 7 are still managed or acceptable for the latest iOS. But again, you have a single kind of approach, a homogeneous approach, which is easier to hack than many different variants. And I can just take a look out in nature. You have two plants side by side, the same type of plant, and one will be infected and one will not. Why? Because there's some natural variation there. Natural variation is actually good for security. Because again, these criminals are not targeting specific, instances. They're trying to cast a wide net. So if you look at, say, the Android marketplace, we have Motorola phones, we have Nokia phones, we have Samsung phones. And who knows what variant of Android operating system they're operating on. And who knows if the people are updating, whereas on the Apple side, pretty much people update to the latest iOS all the time. So on the Android side, okay, Google phones, all of these, there's more variation. They're harder to hack because a hack that may work on one phone, Android phone, Motorola, may not work on a Samsung, may not work on a Nokia. Whereas Apple is just this nice homogeneous target. If I create something and I can hack an iPhone 7, I can hack an iPhone 8 and a 9 and a 10, as long as they're running the same iOS version. So mobile malware, it's on the rise. It's going to continue to be on the rise. Why? Because more and more people are moving to mobile devices rather than desktop units. Okay, it's a bigger target. So it makes sense that organized crime and hackers will go after that. Data, program, and website alteration, it happens. Okay. I'm not going to say much. I really can't talk about cross-site scripting and things like that, just because we haven't covered programming. And really, it's more advanced than what this course is. We'll get this later down the line. Protecting against sabotage. Okay, hopefully everybody has antivirus software installed. However, please keep in mind to apply patches. As soon as a patch comes out, apply it. What we're trying to prevent and thwart is zero-day attacks. Zero-day attacks is when something comes out, some virus or worm, and before there are any safeguards or protections against it, it starts infecting. Now, when I talk about antivirus software, the textbook does not go into, there are actually two different kinds. What you and I have on our computers is a dictionary approach. So what do we know? We know that files, of course, are really just zeros and ones. So I can state that a file or a file format has a particular signature, a digital signature. So when I look at a virus, what is it? It's executable code. It too is going to have that identifiable pattern of zeros and ones. It's going to have a digital signature. So the virus, the antivirus programs that we run on our computers are dictionary based. So there'll be a database, essentially the dictionary, that will have these patterns or digital signatures, the patterns of zeros and ones, and it will compare. Say I download an email. My antivirus software will look at that email and say, does that pattern of zeros and ones match anything in my known dictionary that is to be a known virus? So this is a pattern matching or a dictionary approach. Its efficacy will depend entirely upon my dictionary. Have I updated it? So while you are updating your computer with patches, and again, it should be your device drivers too, you need to continually update or make sure your dictionary, your antivirus dictionary database is up to date. So that's one approach. There is another approach. It's heuristical. Heuristics means rule-based, and we'll start looking at this when we get into AI, okay? A heuristical approach looks at what the executable wants to do. This is very similar, and I presented this once, but not in great detail, of the contrast between compiled code and interpreted code. Within compiled code, the source code, the high-level language, is converted into executable code, machine language, once. It's done it before the executable is run. As such, we call it static. In contrast, interpreted code converts it in real time as the program's running. The difference with compiled code, we saw the fetch execute cycle. Fetch execute cycle just brings down the next executable instruction and essentially executes it blindly. It has no idea of the bigger picture. It does not know that the instructions, the cascade of instructions that it's being instructed to do is reposition the hard drive read-write head to 0 and start writing zeros, essentially wiping out your hard drive. In interpreted code, of course, it would see it in real time. Okay, it would be able to identify you're moving the read-write head, you're starting writing zeros on the hard drive, you're wiping out your hard drive. Don't allow it. Stop. Heuristical antivirus software is able to perform that same analysis. The problem is it's very expensive. I alert you to the Cisco Security Agent, which is a heuristical-based firewall and antivirus software piece of hardware, apparatus. And the Cisco Security Agent has never been breached. Never, not once. It's very expensive. It's about $1 million actually when I last looked, and that was a long time ago. It could very well be $10 million now. I don't know. I'll have to research that. But this introduces another aspect, and we'll look at this again when we get to systems analysis and design. It's very difficult to assess return on investment, ROI, of security. Why? Well, I'll give you the example. You convince your CEO that your organization, your company needs the Cisco Security Agent, and you pay $1 million for it. Great. You're never hacked. Great. But what if you had purchased a $100,000 appliance, security appliance, and never been hacked? Then you would have wasted $900,000. But what if you had purchased that $100,000 appliance, security appliance, and you were hacked? And of course, the negative consequences of that could far exceed $1 million. Well, then you should have purchased the Cisco Security Agent. How do you know? You don't know. The only way you can assess return on investment with security is if you're hacked, and then it's too late. So it's a very difficult assessment, very difficult sell to CEOs, things of this nature. And we'll look at that in more detail when we get to systems analysis and design. Firewalls. Firewalls, they can be external, they can be an appliance, but typically they are built into operating systems now. What they do is they perform, one of the things they do is stateful packet inspection. Well, let's recall what we know about internet communications, specifically, say, the World Wide Web. Again, I type in espn.com into my browser's location bar. Goes off to the DNS, comes back, gives me an IP address. With that IP address, I now do my three-way handshake. But in each case, my computer initiated the communications. So the firewall can keep track of this, stateful. It maintains the state. So when something comes back from espn.com, my firewall looks at its logs. Did I request this? If my computer requested this, fine, let it in. If something arrives without my request, then of course, block it. Now, of course, what a firewall will not catch is, say I have a virus, and that virus sent out that communication. Because my TCP, the firewall does not know that that request came from a virus. It just thought it came from me. It came from my computer. So of course, if that virus generated that request, it's going to come back and allow it back in anyways. Intrusion prevention systems. These are very important. As I referred to yesterday, as you configure your Wi-Fi routers, and again, my full video of configuring a Wi-Fi router is in the sub-menu back in CISS100.com in the Lecture Module 9 security submenu. Turn on your logs, okay? Have a look after a month, 2 months, 3 months. Take a look and see what is trying to penetrate your defenses. It's eye-opening on what is actually occurring out on the internet without anyone's awareness. And again, these are all programs that are running. It's not, when you see an attempted break-in on your computer and your log, it's not as if there's someone sitting out there trying to break into your computer. It's just some script that is likely that is running. Okay. Online theft, fraud, and .coms. I'm not going to say much about these. We're aware of it, and I'm not going to go into further detail beyond the textbook, so it's real straightforward from the text. Know that, of course, with the lockdown, the shutdown, people were forced into online transactions. And many of these people forced into online transactions hadn't done it a lot in the past, so their security policies may not be very good. And recall that the adage, security is 75% policy, 25% application. It's my policies that really protect me. It's my daily, the things I do. So .con, of course, is on the rise. Identity theft. And with identity theft, again, social media is facilitating a lot of this because people are documenting their entire lives. Okay, and I gave this example previously, but again, you lose your password to your online bank account. You call into the bank, and they ask you a series of questions. What street did you grow up on? What high school did you go to? What's your dog's, the name of your first dog? What was your first car? And people are just blindly documenting this on social media. And that social media, much of these social media sites, their API, their application programmer's interface is open. You can actually get to this information. So if you build an application, an expert system application to where you can retrieve it in real time, you're on the phone, someone asks you a question, what street did you grow up on? And you can actually mine the Facebook data. Oh, I grew up on this street. It's very dangerous, and people are just not aware of what they're doing and the consequences. Phishing and spearfishing. Again, we're probably familiar about this. We get that email and they want from someone overseas and they want us to assist them in transferring money and they'll pay us handsomely. There's actually a very good video, very funny TED Talks in the submenu of Lecture Module 9 on spam. And if you have time, I recommend you to watch it. It's kind of funny. Spearfishing takes it a step further. And again, more often than not, recently, a lot of this information that facilitates the spearfishing is coming from social media. And I'll relate to you something that happened a few years ago. A faculty, Hudson Valley faculty, um, outside of my department, you know, social sciences, and they received an email that their child had made a purchase. You know, they essentially received this very innocuous, professional-looking email. Thank you for your purchase, you know, of this item. You can track your item here. And it looked like a UPS link. Or if you have any problems with your order, we'll make it right. Here's the customer service link. You know, we're going to make it real easy, real professional. And it was for an item that the child had spoken about and asked for at the dinner table. So if you're able to mine the social media, because obviously, like probably the kids were talking about it in their posts. I'd really like this. I'd really like this. Okay. And then the attacker, well, you wait a week or two. Wait for the child to bring it up and ask their parents to purchase it. And if it was very expensive, likely, maybe the parent said no. But then when the parent, who is not a computer professional, gets that email, thank you for that purchase with that exact item that, you know, the child was asking for, you know, and immediately they're incensed and they go right online and try to mitigate it. And of course, all they do is compromise their computer. So spearfishing lately is really leveraging social media information. Social media and hacking, is anyone really trying to hack other people's accounts? Yeah, dictionary type accounts. More often than not, it's probably someone let slip their password, um, and allowed someone to get into Facebook. And of course, then they post things that are, inflammatory. Um, so I wouldn't say much about social media hacking and farming. Online auction fraud, again, a big increase due to the lockdown. Um, you know, as soon as something happens, as soon as there's a crisis, there are going to be people around trying to take advantage of it. That's sad. But so eBay saw a large uptick in online auction frauds to where people are selling things at price that's almost too good to be true. You don't want to be too good, but you do want it to be like a deal. So that happened. So general precautions, again, we should be aware of all these things. Just be alert, be on guard, you know, vigilant, always be vigilant online. Digital IDs. So digital IDs, as I stated earlier, are used to create something that's non-reputable. So it's essentially non-repudiation. They extend identification and authentication with a verifiable identity. And these are achieved through digital certificate authorities, okay, or certificate authorities, CAs. And to get a digital certificate, it's actually not that expensive. You'd go to VeriSign, that's one of them, and you'd send them, of course, your photo ID, your license, all of these things. They would really do their diligence to verify that you are who you claim to be. And they'll issue a digital certificate that, if you present it to anyone, establishes that, yes, you are who you are claiming to be. So of course, these are required for certain types of court documents. As we move, legal documents online, digital IDs will increase their use and relevance. Cyberbullying and cyber attack, cyber stalking, excuse me. We're familiar with it. We're growing up in this social media age. But what I wanted to present was something, again, outside of the textbook. I wanted to present to you the New York State Penal Code on aggravated harassment in the second degree. So, person is guilty of aggravated harassment, etc., when they communicate with a person anonymously or otherwise, by telephone, telegraph, by mail, or transmitting or delivering any form of written communication. So this does cover social media posts, email, etc., in a manner likely to cause annoyance or alarm. Okay, that is actually not challenging to do, in a manner likely to cause annoyance. So that's fairly tame. So if you think about all that goes on social media, what takes place in messaging, what takes place through email, okay? Much of this, yes, you could pursue legal recourse for aggravated harassment. So just know that this is there. I'll leave it at that. Here's the link, by the way, should you need to reference it. Databases and electronic programming, profiling, excuse me. Um, there's several things happening, many dangers actually. We know about marketing databases, and they're being bought and sold. Of course, we have that end user license agreement going back to all the social media. What are our choices? Don't just click through. I accept. Yeah, I want to make that post. Click. I accept. Twofold. One, you haven't read it. Secondly, if you read in that end user license agreement, you'll find out that these companies can change it at their whim whenever they want. But also, companies are using this. When you say okay, they're using it to establish that, oh, you're okay with this. You support my end user license agreement, that I'm sharing your data. You support that. So a lot of people are clicking through without really an awareness of the ramifications. So marketing databases, yes, they're out there. We're being profiled. You look at Google Ads preferences. I'm going to show you some things later in this course that are downright frightening. And then, of course, government databases as well. Now, in the early 2000s, something occurred, and the government did back up from this, but we need to be aware of this and be cautious of it in the future, learn from our mistakes. Several government databases, including law enforcement databases, were merged with credit databases. And there was a case, and again, this was before I created CISS100.com, so I don't have it bookmarked on this site. That's unfortunate. There was a case in the South where a man was found in a used car lot after hours, and the police stopped and questioned him. And of course, they had access to his credit report, his salary essentially. And they determined that he didn't have the salary to purchase any of those cars, and they arrested him for trespassing. What if that man had been a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, someone with a high credit report? A doctor in a used car lot after hours. Sorry, officer, I'm just looking. Okay, well, you shouldn't be here. You have to leave. Two different outcomes because of that merger, integration of the government database with the credit database. Now that was undone, okay, legally. But again, it shows you what can happen when we start merging all of these databases. Also, if we look at the credit databases, there are three main ones, and they share information. But there aren't controls for one credit agency to correct the information in another should it be incorrect. So say someone has something negative in a credit report in the database, and that's shared to the other two. And the individual identifies that that is incorrect, and they provide the documentation. No, I returned that product. I never received it. I should not have been charged. The company is wrong for continually stating that I still owe them money. So it's corrected in that one database. Great. But at a later point in time, those other two databases may send that incorrect information that began in the first one back to the first. And then that person has to go through that whole process again. And they almost have no wherewithal to correct the information in the other two where it came from the first one. We have to be very aware of this. Recall what I said. Legislation lags, often significantly behind the technology. Technology will come out, and it's not until sometime later that lawmakers will identify, oh, we need legislation to protect people from certain events because of the technology. Business IT society, right? Okay. Spam. Yeah, I'm not going to say much. We're seeing a rise, mobile phones, things like that. More and more, I'm getting these text messages, thank you for your purchase. Essentially, it's phishing spam on text. Click this link uh, to set up delivery, things like that. I'm not going to go into this in any more detail. We're all seeing it. Again, as technology moves along, you new privacy and security concerns are going to emerge. The latest, wearables and privacy. Okay, um, there are now several, even many court cases where the data from the wearable has now been admissible. There was a case where a woman claimed her ex had been in the house and harassing her. And then in court, it was revealed, per the data from the woman's watch, that she was actually at the gym in the time frame when she was alleging that her ex was in the house and harassing her. So it can both establish, that you were where you were, but it can also work for law enforcement. Presence technology. Well, again, our wearables are tracking where we're going, much like our cell phones are. But with presence technology, now if you get close to something and it detects that you were close to it, now a third party has that information as well, tracking. So beyond, of course, what Verizon and AT&T and time, the cell phone companies can do. Protecting personal information and privacy. Um, you know, Textbook says, use private browsing mode. Well, it was just found. In fact, I think you can find in the sidebar of ciss100.com that Google was actually tracking people despite the private browsing mode. So take it with a grain of salt. Whether that's in their end user license agreement or not, I don't know. Safeguard your email address. Yes, really just to cut down on the junk email we get. So businesses must use adequate security measures. Yes, again, responsibility. Disposing of hardware. Again, very important. Make sure if you're disposing of something, you wipe it clean. It's even worth buying something that will shred a hard drive, essentially rewrite ones and zeros repeatedly in a random fashion across the hard drive. If you can, of course, physically destroy the hard drive or the storage device, that is important too. Electronic surveillance and monitoring, it's only increasing with more and more cameras, drones, cameras on buildings. And we see with China's social merit system, how it can be used. If you're unaware of this, I do recommend you watching YouTube videos. And you'll be presented on both. It's a good thing, it's a bad thing. But in China, they have cameras everywhere. You step outside of a crosswalk, you get a demerit. And so you have a social merit ranking. And that'll determine if you can go to school, college, university, if you can book a hotel room, if you can book travel. So this is occurring. So be aware of it. I hope it doesn't come to this country. So video surveillance, of course. And what is making this all work in China, of course, is their facial recognition, AI-based facial recognition, body language recognition. But then you add in, of course, the presence technology, you add in the location-based services, the tracking with our phones, things like this. So it really is a high volume data stream that is being used. With employee monitoring, note that the companies, the organizations can do it. Absolutely. When we're at work, our companies can look at what we're doing. Entirely permissible. So just be aware of this. They can block websites. They can block Facebook, eBay, all of these things from their computers. Absolutely. Here's where we really need to remain aware. There's so many things going on. The social media companies and big tech, I'll include Google there too, Apple even, Microsoft, have been in front of Senate repeatedly in the past year for what's going on. Um, there are privacy issues, there's censorship, um, a lot of things going on. Net neutrality was struck down, a couple of years ago, and I hope for I don't mean free as in the sense free monetary, but an equal um, internet experience for everyone. So I hope, fingers crossed. And that is the end of chapter 9. So that's lecture module 9. Um, please start Linux Lab 9 early. If you haven't done so, get started today, because you're going to have to read through it once, actually even twice, before you even start. And the reading is significant. And you may have to go back to previous Linux labs to understand. You may have to do extra research. Linux Lab 9 and virtualization is it's a big step. It's a fantastic step. You're gonna feel great when you complete it. Absolutely fantastic. Um, you're, I'll stop there. I do recommend you may want to print out Linux Lab 9, and as you move through it, highlight what you've done, check off what you've done to keep track of your steps, because God forbid you miss a step. We are now moving into system administration, and you don't want to miss a step and have a malfunctioning system, because you have to start over, okay? So it's better just to take your time. And so again, taking your time means not starting Saturday or Sunday, it means starting today. Um, and just work through it slowly, and your understanding is just going to be leaps and bounds, above where you are by next week. It'll be dramatic. That's all I have. Have a great week. Have a great day. If I can answer any questions, please let me know.